Back here on the Lines Podcast Network, I'm Eli Hershkovich, joined by Simon Bray of FanDuel TV, Grade 1 winning trainer, now an analyst with FanDuel Racing over at FanDuel TV. How you doing, Simon?
Doing great, Eli. Excited about the upcoming Preakness. Looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a really, really good race.
Yeah, excited to break it down with you. And remember, our listeners and viewers can get a no-sweat $500 bonus bet sign-up opportunity over at FanDuel Racing. You could head over to thelines.com to get that exclusive and special offer. So as we break down the 149th Preakness Stakes, the second leg of the Triple Crown, Simon, let's start off with the favorites. Muth, the Bob Baffert trained colt, is the 8-5 favorite. And then you have Mystik Dan, who's coming off of the Preakness win, announced over the weekend that he will race in the Preakness after winning the Kentucky Derby. And that, of course, coming after Bob Baffert's horses were both ineligible for the Derby because of his suspension at Churchill Downs. So as we look at Muth first, expected to be the favorite coming into the morning line odds after the post positions were announced on Monday. But what do you make of the initial odds board?
Yeah, it's interesting that the Muth is favorite. I think a lot of that goes to the last time Muth and Mystik Dan faced each other was in the Arkansas Derby, and Muth beat Mystik Dan fairly convincingly. So people look at that, they see that. You add to the fact that Muth is a fresh horse. You mentioned that Baffert ineligible to run in the Derby, so he comes in fresh. Last four winners of the Preakness didn't run in the Kentucky Derby. They came into this race fresh. And this is the first time that the Kentucky Derby winner won't be favored in the Preakness since 2012. They're usually favored when they come back. But I think when you add all of those things, the fact that the result in the Arkansas Derby, the fresh horse, it's Baffert, I think the horse is a deserved favorite. And then you dig a little deeper as far as the race shape and the way it's going to set up. There's not a whole lot of pace in there outside of the two Bafferts. I'm based out here in Southern California. We see that a lot. He controls races because he has multiple horses in races, usually that are on or close to the lead, so can dictate the pace. He's got National Treasure in here, Imagination in here last year, in here this year. National Treasure won it last year. And I think they run 1-2 around the racetrack. At least that's the way I see it on paper in the early stages.
Looking at the conditions, showers could be expected on Saturday, or at least as of this recording here on Tuesday afternoon. And Mystik Dan coming off of the Kentucky Derby win, a little bit of slop, not necessarily rainy or showers at Churchill Downs a couple Saturdays ago, but nonetheless still has plenty of experience in his first big win of the year coming in the slop. So how do you expect the weather to impact the race, if at all?
Well, I think it helps Mystik Dan. There's no question about that. He's proven, and I think that's, going into the Kentucky Derby, there was, some forecast of considerable rain. It wasn't, as you mentioned, and that was increasing Mystik Dan's chances early on in the week. Those chances kind of went up to a longer price at 18-1 at post time because the rain dissipated, but I think it helps him. I think Muth and even Imagination, if you look at the pedigree, when we look at the lineage there's plenty of wet track pedigree there. So I think it's matching up to be a good race. That the top 2, 3, 4 betting choices, I don't think are going to use a wet track as an excuse, and I think that's great.
So you mentioned Imagination, good transition here. The other Bob Baffert trained horse coming out of post 9 and priced at 6-1 as of the morning line odds. He's placed in all 6 of his starts going back to the last couple of years. His Aquabase speed is around 104, which is lower than Muth and Mystik Dan's. Mystik Dan coming up with a 109 at the Kentucky Derby, but it's still fast enough to contend at the Preakness. But then also you go back to his result at the Santa Anita Derby. Couldn't get by Stronghold, and Stronghold finishing 7th in the Kentucky Derby. So how do you kind of weigh Imagination's pedigree here and the variables that go into his opportunity to contend at the Preakness?
Well, again, wet track is going to be his best friend, because what a wet track does, in my opinion, as a former trainer, sometimes you get these exaggerated win margins like we saw with Mystik Dan in the Southwest by 8 lengths. So what a wet track does, I don't think it moves a horse up. It slows the others down, and there you get that exaggerated win margin, that separation. So I think Imagination is a horse that can handle the wet track. I'm not saying he's good enough, but therein lies the rub. That's what levels the playing field. He might lack talent, but the track, if it's wet and sloppy, and that's a big if, will level the playing field. He's by Into Mischief out of an Empire Maker mare. Empire Maker, of course, won the Belmont on a sloppy track. He's not fast enough. You're exactly right. But the key for imagination, and maybe it helps Muth, he's a pace factor. Like I said, Muth is going to go to the lead. Baffert said that. He loves to win races like that. He trains like that. He's going to send Muth. Imagination is going to sit second. And because when you have a trainer that trains two speed horses, they're not going to duel each other into submission. It would be crazy. So one's going to go, one's going to sit second. It'll be Muth and then Imagination. So, he's in there for his own merits, but he's also going to ensure a pretty quick pace, and he's going to let Muth walk alone on the lead here. So I think he has a big impact in the race. I'm not sure he's good enough, to your point, though.
Looking at the posts in general, obviously a much smaller field than the Kentucky Derby, but what do you consider to be the most and least favorable post positions as we look at this after the post positions were announced on Monday?
I don't think there's any excuses this year for the runners. I mean, the inside post is never a perfect place to be, but when you look at Mugato, his running style, I don't think it affects him. I mean, he's a horse that comes from off the pace, so being drawn down on the inside or the outside, it doesn't matter. You just sit back, kind of take your medicine and then make one run. So I don't think post position. I like that the fact that Muth and Mystik Dan are drawn next to each other. Muth's a lot quicker, at least on paper. I don't think they're going to be changing Mystik Dan's style. So I don't think there's a whole lot of issue here with post position. Catching Freedom's a deep closer. Just Steel, he was involved in that pace in the Kentucky Derby. I mean, it was suicidal fractions, 22, 46. 3-horse field. And Dwayne Lucas said on Monday morning at Pimlico that they're not going to do that. They are not going to send and go. So they're going to go back to his running style where he sits just off the pace. So I don't think post position is going to affect anyone in here. I like Tuscan Gold a little bit to the outside. He's drawn, just inside of Imagination. I think he's an interesting horse, and he's got a good. I guess he's got a good post because he's outside of Muth, and when you're drawn outside looking in, there's a slight advantage there. But when you're a speed horse, you want to be further to the inside.
Yeah, Tuscan Gold coming out of post 8 and priced at 8-1 on the morning line odds. Looking at some of the bigger prices, you mentioned Mugato and Uncle Heavy, Sees the Gray, Just Steel, all priced at 15-1 or higher. Of the long shots, or at least of those bigger odds, any that pique your fancy?
If I had to pick one out of the ones you just mentioned, I mean, it would probably be Uncle Heavy. Again, it's 15-1, so we can't knock their talent too much or who they've beaten. They're 15-1 for a reason. But he had legitimate excuses in the Wood Memorial last time. I thought Resilience ran a pretty good race in the Kentucky Derby, who won the Wood. Uncle Heavy, he had a wide trip. He was impeded by a fallen horse, so he didn't have enough points to get into the Kentucky Derby. I think that's a blessing in disguise. Like I said, he comes in as a fresh horse. They've done well in these races. So he would be the big long shot. I think Muth is the one to beat. And I think Tuscan Gold, if you're looking for a little bit of an upset, 8-1 for Chad Brown. He's used this kind of modus operandi before in taking a fresh horse that didn't run in the Derby to win the Preakness. He's won 2 Preaknesses, and he's used that formula to win this race twice and finish second last year with Blazing Sevens. And the fact, Eli, that he was pointing to a race up at Belmont, the Peter Pan, and elected to bypass that in favor of the tougher Preakness, I think is a ringing endorsement.
So Tuscan Gold and Uncle Heavy, a couple of longer shots to win the Preakness for you. And looking at Uncle Heavy in particular, coming off of that Grade 3 win in February at Aqueduct, I want to ask you, from your experience, though, obviously Ortiz Jr. has a lot of experience in his own right, but taking over as a jockey of late, how does that impact a horse for better or worse?
I don't think it has a huge impact. I mean, when I was training, I never really liked to give instructions to jockeys, whether they're riding a horse, first time out, or whether they're, a new jockey. I like to tell them the idiosyncrasies about the horse rather than, tactics and how it plays out, because things change. And then, the jockeys are beholden to instructions, and I don't think that's a good situation. Plus, I'll lean on Hall of Famer Mike Smith, and he's always said, sometimes the best ride I've ever put on a horse is the first time I get on them, because I know very little. I'm not swayed one way or the other about running styles, this and that. So I think sometimes when you jump on top of a horse for the first time, there's no pressure there. Change things up, do your own thing, and I think that's the case with Irad Ortiz. Now, Uncle Heavy, look, he's got to move way up as far as talent goes, but 9-horse field, could he finish third or fourth? Absolutely.
Coming out of post 2, 20-1 on the morning line odds. Want to wrap it up here with this, Simon. Mystik Dan estimated, I don't think these odds are necessarily available at FanDuel Racing or any sportsbook, at least as of this recording, but estimated Triple Crown odds right around 11-1 with the Belmont on deck, assuming he would race at the Belmont if he wins the Preakness. Would you consider those fair odds? Maybe you're not an odds maker, but would you make that bet for Mystik Dan?
At 11-1, I probably would, because, if he wins the Preakness, those odds are going to drop considerably, right? I mean, so I think I would. Look, he's not without a chance, and I think Muth is the deserved favorite. Kenny McPeak said it, Dwayne Lucas said it, but Mystik Dan, is a very talented racehorse. The only really glitch in his armor is when he ran him back 2 weeks. That's the concern for me with the Preakness. Kenny said it all along. He said, we've tried the experiment of running him back in 2 weeks. It didn't work. It didn't work for him. He didn't eat up. He was a little lackluster. But he said early on, it's an easy decision. If he eats up, then he's going to the Preakness, and he's been doing extremely well. So, yeah, I would take those 11-1 odds, absolutely. And I think he's going to run a big race. I really do. I know he was behind Muth in Arkansas, but, if the game was easy as looking at past performances and just dictating on previous results, then we'd all be rich. But that's not the case. These are living animals. Things change, results change.
Yeah, variance is certainly a part of sports betting and horse racing. Yeah. And want to wrap it up here with your pick, Simon. Official pick for the Preakness, along with any exotics that you may be interested in.
Yeah, I'm not gonna go outside of the box here, and I said after the Derby, Muth. I just think, and then when the entries came out, and I see the way this race shapes up, and know how Baffert trains, he's won Derby sending horses to the lead like Authentic, and I think that's going to be the case with Muth. And then I'd use him over Tuscan Gold and Mystik Dan. I think it's going to be a fairly formful race. I don't see a huge price, in second and third, like multiple price horses underneath. Uncle Heavy I would throw in if I was playing trifectas and superfectas. But, straight exacta, Muth over Tuscan Gold for me.
He is Simon Bray of FanDuel TV, Grade 1 winning trainer and an analyst over at FanDuel Racing on FanDuel TV. Remember, FanDuel is the only sportsbook app where you can bet on the Preakness. Bet on the Preakness on the same app with all of your other favorite sports over at FanDuel Racing, the first and only to offer horse racing wagering alongside traditional sportsbook odds. With a single account and wallet, customers can wager on the Preakness Stakes and all the races leading up to it this coming weekend. Really appreciate the time, Simon, and good luck with your exotics and your straight bet potentially on Muth.
Appreciate it, Eli. Thanks. Yeah, I'll be heading out there tomorrow along with the rest of the crew. We've got full team coverage all week long, so tune into FanDuel TV. We'll be bringing you all the races Thursday, Friday, and of course Saturday, and looking forward to the 149th Preakness. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, Simon.